The Ohio State Buckeyes, who many feel were snubbed from the college football playoff, and the USC Trojans will meet in the Goodyear Cotton Bowl to wrap up a full day of football on December 29th. Ohio State is a touchdown favorite in the betting market with a total in the mid-60s as we look ahead to what projects to be a great matchup between two of the most recognized brands in college football. Both teams had a decent case as two lost teams. USC heads into this game with an 11-2 record, but the Cotton Bowl is not where USC expected to be. Some publications were calling for USC to be a national champion, or at the very least make the Final Four of the college football playoff. That didn't happen, as USC was just 4-9 against the spread this season, which is a pretty obvious example of how short this team fell of expectations despite a great record and a Pac-12 championship. The Trojans weren't great against the spread, but they tackled most of the challenges put in front of them. A 30-27 loss at Washington State and then a blowout loss to Notre Dame in a pretty awful spot were the only blemishes. It still felt like more was expected of the team, and that starts with quarterback Sam Darnold. Darnold, quite possibly the first quarterback off of the board if he declares for the NFL draft, posted a 26-12 touchdown interception ratio with a 63.7% completion rate. Deontay Burnett had a big year with 74 catches for 975 yards and 9 touchdowns, and USC had a lot of big passing plays with 13.5 yards per reception. But Darnold's interceptions, particularly in the red zone, held the team back. Ronald Jones ran for 6.1 yards per carry on 242 carries. His 1,486 yards ranked among the leaders in the country, and so did his 18 touchdowns. The USC offense ran up 6.7 yards per play. It's hard to talk about a team missing expectations with numbers like those, especially since that was the most yards per play for any USC team in this decade. The defense did regress a little bit. USC allowed 5.7 yards per play, which was tied for the second most this decade. The Trojans allowed 38 more yards per game than last season and 2.1 more points per game. All in all, the Trojans seem to be a victim of circumstance. A lot of Pac-12 offenses improved this season, especially teams like Arizona State and Arizona. USC did have some injury problems on both sides of the ball as well, and missed the presence of Adoree Jackson. The Trojans also played one of the hardest schedules in college football with a tricky Pac-12 slate. There are other teams, though, that play tough schedules and still put up better defensive numbers, so we can't fully give USC a pass. The Trojans should be ready here. They should be excited at the prospects of beating a team like Ohio State as a springboard into the next season with more chances coming. The Ohio State Buckeyes went 11-2 as well, including a Big Ten Conference championship. But the 6-point margin of victory over wasn't enough to sway voters and force them to forget the inexplicable 31-point loss to Iowa. The Buckeyes were in a similar spot in 2015. They were better that year than they were this year, but got snubbed for the college football playoff and were sent to the Fiesta Bowl against Notre Dame. Instead of mope about it, the Buckeyes went to Arizona and destroyed Notre Dame in a game that wasn't as close as the final score would suggest. A matchup against a team like USC should have Ohio State very focused, especially because it would strengthen next year's ranking and case. The Buckeyes have struggled in spotlight games, and this is one of them. J.T. Barrett gets to finish his storied college career in his home state, which is something he should be excited about. It will also help to have 4 weeks to recover from knee surgery. Barrett posted a 35-9 touchdown interception ratio during the regular season and had a 64.7% completion rate. He had 732 yards rushing and 10 rushing scores for a running game that averaged 5.9 yards per carry. J.K. Dobbins had 1,364 yards as a true freshman, and he'll also be back in his home state to play. Mike Weber had 608 yards on just 96 carries while being limited due to injuries. The Buckeyes found some wide receivers this year, as Paris Campbell, Austin Mack, Benjamin Victor, KJ Hill, and Terry McLaurin all took turns having success. We'll see who starts next season, but all of those guys project to be back. Ohio State had 7 yards per play for the first time since the 2014 season under first-year OC Kevin Wilson. Ohio State's defense was also exceptional. Say what you will about the level of offensive competition the Buckeyes played, but for a team that has lost about a dozen NFL-caliber starting players over the last 2 years, this was a group that came together nicely. The Buckeyes held the opposition to 4.4 yards per play. A terrific front seven held opponents to just 3 yards per carry, with their collective opponents averaging 4.6 yards per carry this season. Ohio State's weakness has been its secondary this season, which is what USC and Sam Darnold will look to exploit in this game. The Buckeyes defense also faces a weird situation here. Defensive coordinator Greg Schiano was nearly hired as the Tennessee head coach before a tsunami of backlash stopped that move in its tracks. So there is a question as to how invested is Schiano in this game, and by proxy, the defensive players. Ohio State is the better team and the deserving favorite. USC just hasn't been as impressive as their 11-2 record would indicate. The Buckeyes, though, are still hurting from the CFP snub and still have the additional distraction of the Schiano situation. Clay Hilton is at a massive disadvantage game planning against Urban Meyer here. But the Buckeyes' weakness is the secondary, and Sam Darnold has a chance to exploit that. The better play on this game is probably the over. It is high at 64.5 points, but Ohio State is highly efficient and has a lot of time to dissect this matchup. USC should be able to throw it around a bit. The slight lean goes to USC, but the stronger play is on the over. Our pick and prediction, USC Trojans plus 7.5 and over the total of 64.5 points. For our pick and prediction on this game and every other game this week, and a wealth of free stats and information, check out bangthebook.com.